There are apartments where people move in with hopes for a new life. But sometimes that new life turns into a real nightmare. When I first saw this apartment, it seemed like an unbelievably generous gift. A spacious living room, freshly painted walls, almost new furniture without dents or scratches. The agent, a dry woman named Mary, kept her hands on the folder and spoke matter-of-factly, as if she didn't notice my surprise. The price was almost half the market value. To my cautious why, she replied briefly, "The owner is in a hurry." I nodded, walked around the kitchen where chrome handles sparkled under the lamp, and caught myself thinking a simple, childish thought. Finally, I'm lucky. The house was located in a quiet neighborhood in southeast Portland between two parallel streets. The entrance was clean, the tiles were intact, and the mailboxes bore neat names. On my first day, I went up to my third-floor apartment, looked around the hallway, and noticed something strange. Several neighbors I met on my way to the door avoided me, almost with fear. I smiled at everyone, but in response I saw only brief nods and perfunctory hellos, after which they quickly disappeared behind the doors of their apartments. An elderly man with a newspaper under his arm, I met him at the stairs, lingered on my key, and without raising his head whispered, "You won't be here long." He pretended he wasn't talking to me but to the wall and walked past as if he urgently needed to catch the evening news. His words stuck in my head, but I dismissed them. New home, new people. In the evening, I opened my laptop and drafted an invitation to a small get-together. Tea, pizza, a couple of pies from the nearest bakery, no alcohol and no loud music. I printed out the flyers and hung them by the elevator and on the bulletin board. At the appointed time, I put mugs on the table, heated up the kettle, and turned on the soft light of the floor lamp. The minutes ticked by, the kettle cooled, and the pizza got cold under the lid. No one came. Not a single person knocked on the door or sent a text message to the number I had written on the leaflet. I walked around the apartment, turned off the lights in the kitchen, drew the curtains, and told myself aloud that it was normal. Everyone was busy. I slept restlessly that first night. Someone was quietly moving around behind the wall, and I heard clear, confident footsteps in the hallway. Not hurried, not dragging, but confident, like someone walking toward a familiar door. When I looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. A strip of light from the emergency lamp divided the carpet into warm and cold halves. There were no footsteps. I returned to bed, and at that moment the light in the bedroom flickered, strangely as if there had been a power surge, and then went out, as if someone had turned it off with a normal click. I lay there listening to the electricity humming in the walls. In the morning, everything was as usual. The sink gleamed in the kitchen, and the living room smelled of new wood. I chalked up the night's oddities to adjustment. In the afternoon, I bought a couple of plates, glasses, curtains, and towels. In the evening, when the gray sky hung over the houses, I turned on the TV to have some program playing in the background. The TV switched itself to snow, white and black noise, and from there, through the interference, for a second it seemed like some kind of whisper. I picked up the remote and started pressing the channel buttons, but all the channels were snowy. After a minute, everything fixed itself. On the third day, my neighbor from apartment 6, a young man in a sweatshirt, met me at the elevator and took a step back, even though we had barely brushed shoulders. He moved away so abruptly it was as if I had suddenly sneezed right in his face. "Hey, I'm new here," I said. "You'd better move out," he said dryly without looking at me. "I'm serious," he added dryly. He entered the elevator, pressed the button, and the elevator started moving, leaving me puzzled in my reflection on the steel surface of the elevator doors. I went to the stairs. When I went outside, I met our technician. Short, slightly stooped. He was fixing the handle on the utility room door. His badge said Luis. I asked about the electricity and he looked up. His eyes were large and honest, like those of a man who cannot lie but knows how to keep quiet. "The wiring here is new," he said and paused before adding, "Yours definitely is." "Then why?" I hesitated. "The lights behave strangely at night. The TV hisses." Lewis looked over my head at the gray clouds and said quietly, "There have been a couple of incidents here. I don't know if I should tell you. Several tenants have died in your apartment." The corner of my mouth twitched. "What happened? Accidents? Murder?" "Officially cardiac arrest. Different people. According to the records, no connection between them. One..." He paused. "One disappeared. Just vanished." "Do you really think..." I wanted to finish with that it has something to do with the apartment, but I didn't dare. "After the second incident in this apartment, no one wanted to live there, only visitors," said Louis. "Who don't know..." He wiped his hands on a rag, nodded to me, and went into the back room without closing the door completely. Now I knew why the price was lower, and why people turned away. After the conversation, I became more attentive. Every object in the apartment took on a subtle before and after. On the third evening, I found shards of glass on the floor, even though I remembered putting the glass in the dishwasher. "The cat," I thought, and the silence of the apartment answered me with an empty echo. I didn't have a cat. I always walked quickly past the mirror in the hallway. At first, it was simply because it was colder there. The wind found a crack somewhere near the window at the end of the corridor. But then there was another reason. A couple of times, glancing at my reflection, I noticed what looked like an extra vertical shadow in the depths of the mirrored room, not matching the door jambs. For a split second, it seemed like someone was standing behind me. Then it was gone. At such moments, my heart would tighten and my fingers would become dry. To distract myself, I decided to sort through the remaining boxes in the storage room. In the far corner, behind a mop and an empty microwave box, I found an old digital camera. It was small, with a matte body and a worn rubber grip where the thumb would rest. The power cord was lying nearby. The camera wouldn't turn on. The battery was dead. I plugged it into my extension cord to charge and wiped the lens with a rag just in case. "I'll take a look later. Maybe there's something interesting there," I thought, and put it aside for the evening. At night, the light went out again in the small room that I hardly ever used. It didn't just go out. It seemed to flicker, retreat into the lamp, and then disappear. At that moment, the TV in the living room turned on by itself. There was a dull thud, and the screen went grainy. I went back, pressed the button. The sound didn't turn off, and a shiver ran through my whole body. I heard footsteps in the hallway and then a slight creak at my door, as if someone had approached the door and frozen. In the morning, I went to work and caught myself thinking that I didn't want to go back. The house that had seemed like a refuge 2 days ago now stood somewhere inside my consciousness like a black square without windows. When I returned, I found the camera charging and tried to turn it on. The screen flashed and lit up. A confusing menu, old dates. The last recording had no name, only a number. I sat down on the floor by the wall, put the camera on my knees and pressed play. A man appeared on the screen. He was about 35 years old and wearing a gray t-shirt. His face looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, but he didn't look sick. The apartment, my apartment, was visible around him. The same floor lamp, the same kitchen with metal handles, the same mirror in the hallway reflecting the dark window opening. The man spoke quietly, as if afraid of waking someone in the next room. "Today again," he said and licked his dry lips. "The light and the footsteps. I thought someone was playing a joke, but no. I checked everything. I hear it." He fell silent, listening. and I involuntarily listened with him even though my room was quiet. "They come to the door and stop," he said. "Always." His breathing quickened. He sat down on the sofa as I sometimes did in the evening and turned the camera toward himself. "I was told that there have been incidents here," he said the word cautiously as if tasting it. "Cardiac arrest. But it doesn't just stop for no reason, it stops because of something." He fell silent and I felt the air in my room begin to thicken like syrup before it boils. The sound of the recording became thinner, as if someone had quietly turned down the bass. I caught myself sitting in the semi-darkness. The sunset had fallen behind the rooftops and the light from the window had turned a deadly gray. I didn't turn on the lamp. Louis's words floated into my head like a marker pen mark. "Only visitors. Those who don't know." The man on the screen suddenly raised his head and listened. His gaze went somewhere to the right of the camera, where my front door was now. He leaned forward and whispered, "Footsteps." I pressed stop and turned around. It was quiet outside the door. I pressed play again. On the recording there were 3 steps. A pause, 2 steps. I already knew this rhythm. The man sat with his fists clenched, the camera shaking from the tension in his hands. He swallowed. "They stopped at the door." At that moment in my apartment on the other side of reality, I heard the exact same thing. 3 steps, pause, 2 steps. I propped myself up on my elbows. My throat was dry, my pupils seemed to have dilated. I reached for the floor lamp switch. The man on the screen slowly turned his head toward the mirror in the hallway. There in the depths, where the light from the corridor dissolved into shadow, a vertical crease flashed for a split second as if someone were standing behind the frame out of sight. I heard a quiet sigh in the camera and in my room too. 2 sighs, one inside the screen, the other behind my back, almost in sync. In the recording, the man whispered, "I hear footsteps behind me." I didn't turn off the camera. I felt the back of my neck grow cold, the skin on my shoulders tighten and become thick. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my reflection in the black blank TV screen. A dark shoulder, a motionless neck, and behind my figure, a shadow. "This is ridiculous," I said into the void. I tried to get up, but the void seemed to put its hand on my shoulder, not with its weight, but with its presence. In the camera, the man also got up, as if connected to me by an invisible rope, and the camera, jerked by his hand, cut the image. The sound on the recording floated like a magnetic tape. "If anyone is watching this," he exhaled, "don't sit here in the dark. Don't listen. Leave." He turned at the rustle. The camera shook, grabbing the edge of the mirror, the kitchen pillars, the corner of the window. Everything blurred and became flat. At that moment, I heard a whisper behind me. It was very close, so close that the skin on my ear tingled. The words were indistinct, as if someone were saying my name without opening their mouth. I remembered Louis the technician, his simple phrases, his gaze. I remembered the pizza and tea for the meeting that never happened, the elderly neighbor who whispered, "You won't be here long." And I understood the meaning of those words. Something barely perceptible shifted in my room. Not an object, the air. The corner of the curtain swayed even though the windows were closed. I held my breath. The camera beeped softly, a warning that the battery was low. The recording rippled. The man sat quietly for a second, then slowly turned the camera to where my mirror is now. In the reflection, I saw a silhouette, dark, without details. It wasn't getting closer. It was just there, and it made my chest tighten. "I hear footsteps behind me," the man repeated in the recording. The camera jerked and emitted a short metallic crackle from the speaker. The image jumped closer to the mirror. For a second, the shadow appeared at the edge of the frame, too large, unnaturally elongated. I looked up from the screen. The room was in thick semi-darkness, and every outline became soft and blurred. Behind me, something sighed a second time, a little deeper than before, and again a very quiet whisper. I couldn't make out the words. Maybe my name, maybe don't turn around. My back muscles twitched, my knees went weak. The recording ended with the previous tenant stopping talking, as if his tongue had become heavy, and slowly turning his head without looking at the camera. For a split second, the sound became very clear. I could hear water dripping somewhere in the kitchen, indistinct whispering and heavy breathing growing louder. Then, a sharp click and a black screen. I didn't turn around. I sat there, clutching the camera with the black screen in my hands, and listened. At first, there were slow, heavy footsteps in the hallway, but soon I realized they were coming from the next room, audible through the slightly open door. Closer and closer, clearer and clearer. And with every heartbeat, I caught myself thinking, maybe my neighbor's words, "You won't be here long," weren't a warning but a sentence,